We're talking about the ancient Israelites, Israel. When I say Israel, what comes into your mind? What is Israel? The word Israel, when I mention it, what comes into your mind? How can you define it?
Nation.
A nation. Awesome.
People.
A people. Awesome.
A race.
Isis, Ra,
A race.
El.
Okay. Isis, Rael. Okay.
The Levant.
The Levant. Okay. Those who overcome, Madam Marcy says. Okay. So we all agree. The chosen, Madam Nicole said in the chat. Awesome. Okay, so it looks like we all agree that the definition of this word changes per the historical period. Do we all agree? That the meaning of the word Israel shifts over time. Do we all agree? Madam Nicole says yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. If
yes. Oh, yeah.
Yes, it does. I do agree. If we chart the appearance of the word in the Bible, what do we see? With our first encounter with the word Israel, we're talking about a person. Jacob is returning back home from Haran, and he wrestles all night with an angel or with God, and he leaves injured with a name change or an addition to his name. The next time the appearance of this word comes in the Bible, it refers to a nation. They are at Shechem in the book of Joshua, and there's a covenant. A nation is formed officially. Then this name refers to a united monarchy, which is the kingdom of Israel. The name shifts over time again, and it referred to a divided monarchy. Let me explain. Under a united monarchy, it was the kingdom of Israel. When there was a split, the south went by Judah, the north went by Israel. So now Israel refers to the north, the northern kingdom of Israel. So it starts as a person, it shifts to a nation, it becomes a united monarchy, it becomes a divided monarchy. So the definition is changing per the historical period. Now, the north falls to Assyria, the south falls to Babylonia. When that happened, Judah, the south, becomes the memory holder for all Israel. By surviving as a people, Judah wins the right to tell the story of Israel. And in that story, Judah sees itself as the only remnant of Israel. This is important. extremely important for where we're going and understanding this book that we have. By surviving, Judah won the right to tell the story of Israel. And in that story, Judah sees itself as the only remnant of Israel. When they returned from exile in Babylonia, they returned under the mantle of all Israel. Let's focus on verses number 5. The Judeans who had experienced exile, when I say Judeans, I'm referring to Judah, the south. So the Judeans who had experienced exile in Babylonia returned to Judah. They returned to Jerusalem with a book, some form of the Torah. Their experience of conquest, deportation, and exile had led them to preserve their stories and laws and to pass them down to their children in writing. In this written document, some form of the Torah, they preserve the story and memory of their ancestor Jacob, who also had experienced exile in Mesopotamia and who had also returned to his homeland. As he returned, he was met by God, wrestled with him, and received the name Israel.
Moray, I always had a problem with this story, and this goes back to the quote that Napoleon made about history is just a bunch of lies agreed upon. So being that, like you said, we don't have the northern tribes' actual input. This is a whole complete. I don't want to say fantasy, but outside of a better word to think of the southern tribes' machinations here.
Okay, you do have a valid point. We'll see if we can fault them. So these returning exiles saw themselves as the new Israel, the house of Jacob. Why? Just like Jacob, they thought they had also wrestled with God through the night, and they had come out injured but permanently blessed. You see how it relates? The same thing that the ancestor Jacob experienced. He went to Babylonia. He was treated badly by Laban. On his return back to the land, he wrestles with Yah. He leaves injured but permanently blessed. And they could relate. They could relate to that. So we've seen that the definition of the name Israel or the word Israel changes in every period. There is something about the word that actually stays consistent. And what is that? Israel as chosen. Israel is the chosen remnant of the Israelite God. is the chosen person, as the Judeans narrated, the chosen nation, the chosen monarchy, and then the chosen remnant of the Israelite God. This is the insider's view of Israel. This is the biblical view of Israel. This is the Torah or the Tanakh view of Israel. Like I said, our text is not objective. So as honest people, as good scholars, we want to hear views from our neighbors. We want the outsider's view of Israel. Like Mr. Dalet was saying, can I rock with this narrative? We cannot just rock with it. Israel had neighbors. So can we look outside of the text to see what the outsider's view of Israel was? When we do that, when we turn to the outsider's view or other nations' view and uses of the term Israel, we get a very different picture from what is presented in the Bible. Let's take a couple. The first mention of Israel outside the Bible is on the stele of Pharaoh Meneptah. We looked at this before. It's an Egyptian, it was found in Thebes, Egypt. It's an Egyptian inscription, erected by Pharaoh Meneptah that contains the first extra biblical reference to Israel. So this is about the time of the Judges, when Israel first emerges as a nation in the land of Canaan. What does the stele say? Let's start from the introduction. I want you to pay attention to the introduction very carefully. Year 5, third month of summer, day 3, under the majesty of Horus, mighty bull, rejoicing in Ma'at, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Banera Meronum, whatever that is, the son of Rai, Meneptah, content with Ma'at, magnified by the power, exalted by the strength of Horus, strong bull, who smites the 9 bulls, whose name is given to eternity forever. I highlighted that for a reason. Has that statement come true?
Yes, because we're looking at it now.
We are looking at it now. His name, given to eternity forever, has proven quite true. Because in school, we had to memorize his name. When you go into the halls of academia and biblical college classes, his name is actually something that you need to memorize because it shows up in the test. They teach you about Meneptah's stele because it's important if you're talking about Israel. We have all committed his name into memory. So that statement that he's made here has proven to be quite true. Okay, let's go on. He continues. The princes are prostrate, saying, Shalom. Not one of the 9 bulls lifts his head. Tihunu is vanquished. Kati at peace. Canaan is captive with all foe. Ashkelon is conquered. Giza seized. Yanaum made non-existent. Israel is wasted, bare of seed. The first mention of Israel outside of the text is a group of people in the land of Canaan but not a chosen people of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. It's one among several peoples and cities that the Pharaoh celebrates conquering. So this is a different picture that is painted from that of our text.
I just want to interrupt real quick. I find it interesting that the bow is mentioned because we know that Nubia was considered the land of the bow. So that just, is curious to me there, in that respect.
Thank you very much, sir. So this is the first mention of Israel as a nation outside of the text. We find the second reference of Israel in the black obelisk of Shalmaneser III. This is the obelisk of Shalmaneser III. This obelisk records the tribute received from several conquered regions. So what you're looking at is the first image of an Israelite. The first image of an Israelite is on the obelisk of Shalmaneser III, the black obelisk. It records the tribute received from several conquered regions, and Israel is one of them. This is the earliest recorded image of an Israelite. And what is significant is that he is bowing. He's actually bowing before the Assyrian monarch. This is what the obelisk reads. Shalmaneser, king of all peoples, Lord, priest of Ashur, mighty king, king of all the four regions, son of all peoples, despot of all lands, son of Ashur Nashapal, the high priest, whose priesthood was acceptable to the gods, and who brought in submission at his feet the totality of the countries, glorious offsprings of Tukuliti Uta, who slew all of his foes and overwhelmed them like a deluge. These kings did not have low self-esteem at all. They really told us how they felt about themselves. The inscription that Israel appears on says this, or the first Israelite. The tribute of Jehu, son of Omri, that should ring a bell. I received from him silver, gold, a golden bowl, a golden beaker, golden goblet, pitchers of gold, lead, staffs for the hand of the king, javelins. Jehu is from the house of Omri. The king of Jehu of Israel appears in 2 Kings, chapters 9. So you see what's going on when you go outside of the text. What Israel signifies depends on the time period and the source document. Within our text, Israel represents a remembered history and a present reality. It represents a person, a people, a monarchy, and should I say a hope. In non-biblical sources, Israel is listed among several other nations that the much larger countries such as Egypt and Assyria, have conquered. You see the difference? The Bible portrays a story, outside the Bible tells its own. And we would have to use both narratives, both documents, biblical and extra biblical, to really understand what really happened to shape the text as we have it.